Yeah, delighted to see you again. It's nice to see a friendly face. It feels like it's been a bit too long.
Yeah, well, it definitely has been, and we were just saying before we went live. Obviously, we're literally down one road from each other, both Essex boys. It's great to have a fellow Essex boy on the show. So
And
yeah,
you know
great.
what? That is really true because I think a lot of our heroes as well in this space are often American as
Mm.
well, or they're all over the world. So it's really nice that just by fluke, there's two of us just up the road from each other.
Yeah, so you've got quite the background as I've just shared with the listener, and obviously I've had the pleasure of knowing you for a few years now, and it's always delight. You're always smiling. You're always, so if you're listening to this on the podcast on iTunes or Stitcher or whatever, you can watch this on YouTube as well. And he's always got this big beaming smile, and
Yeah.
he's such a lovely guy. But what I really want to get kicked off with is, as I do with all of our guests, is getting into the work you're doing, because you've created success multiple times now. I mean, you started off, you're a professional footballer, you then went into the city, you had not one but two successful multi-million-pound brokerages. Then you set up a business in the alcohol space. Then now you're in the personal development space. So you are someone that, I mean, when they talk about success leaves clues, clearly whatever it is that you're doing, you're thinking, your actions, there's clearly something that you replicate over and over that enables you to be as successful as you are. So can we go back to the beginning and start with sort of young Andy, what he wanted to be? Because like I say, you went on and lived most young boys, certainly English boys' dreams, which is playing professional football.
Yeah, I mean, and that was the start of it. That was the greatest decision I ever made. And I was at 16, I had that, nice position to stay on at school and play rugby. I actually played a lot more rugby than I ever did football, funnily enough, or follow the dream and become a professional footballer. And I chose professional football at 16. I mean, it feels so young now. I've got a daughter that's on the verge of maybe going into full-time ballet at the same age. It just feels so young, but that was the making of me. I've got to say that, like, that bravery or that courageousness to go for it when people were saying, stay on, go to university, get all that sort of stuff. And I was like, no, I'm going to go for this. But what I found really quickly, almost on day 5, I wasn't good enough. Right. And that was a really stark awakening for me, because I'd been a real fixed mindset person up to that point, like really entrenched in that fixed mindset, and fixed mindset being that modality of, you're genetically gifted or whatever it is, and you're limited by your genes, and there's no room for improvement, right? So you've got to demonstrate every single day that you're the best, because if you don't, it's like, it burns into your soul that you're a failure, and that can really be unbelievably motivating. I think a lot of early athletes are like that, right? But it only gets you so far. And then I realized quite brutally that I just wasn't good enough. I've been playing rugby, as I mentioned, and technically I was absolutely miles behind. There's probably 30 professionals, and at 16, it's a man's world. You are in competition for men's spaces on that side. You're all on the same team, but believe me, right, and this, right? You've played real top level sport. It's a competition as well to move through the ranks and play. So that was real groundbreaking for me. And that got me thinking differently from that young age. It was like, oh, right, I know I've got to do something different. If I continue just to show up and do what I'm doing, I've got no chance. And that led me to read a lot of books, which is a bizarre thing to do for a footballer. I was probably one of the few footballers that do. But I did start to read books, not in the self-development space, just about biographies of the great players. And I kept seeing the same thing over and over and over. All of those players that I assumed were just the most naturally gifted, talented in that fixed mindset approach to life, they actually weren't. They were the hardest working players in the team. They were the last people off the training pitches. They were the ones who were out there curling free kick after free kick, thousands and thousands of free kicks. So when they turned up on match day, people would say, oh my God, they're the most gifted player I've ever seen. It's the same story the world over, right? Of course, there is an ounce of genetic ability, and there are the very, 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 very exceptional people where it all comes together. But on the whole, if you peel back the layers, it's the same story in business, entrepreneurship, which you know yourself. It's that hard work and it's deliberate practice. So that really started to change my thinking. So in that space, I started to train differently. I started to think a bit differently. I started to exercise like on top of all the exercise I was being given in the football arena. And sort of against all the odds, I had this like transition through the ranks, and then I got released. It's the truth. I got released from Leighton Orient at 18. So it was this just as I thought, like, I've got this thing under control. I got that, like, you can't imagine what that's like. You know, from the age of 10, I signed to be a professional footballer. It was all I ever wanted to be. And then you get to 18 and it was as brutal as like X Factor. It was like queue up outside the manager's office. And it was, you either came out in tears or like a hero. And I came out in tears. It was like earth shattering, but that was that real failure in my life right there. There was an opportunity to come back from it, which I did, found another club, again, building on the momentum that I created already, made it into the first team, scored in the first team. Career was really starting to take off, got injured again at 20. That was it. Career over. So already by 20, I think I'd had these couple of, you know, monumental failures in my life, as well as an experience of, oh, if I think a bit differently, I get different results. I think that was definitely one of the better things that happened to me. And also I think that arena, because it's hard and it's tough, you know, you fail and succeed constantly in sport. That's why I'm a big advocate of sport for children. Find a sport that works for children, whether it's weightlifting or it's hockey or it's ice hockey or it's football, because you live and breathe those successes and failures. You learn to become resilient and robust. So by the time I moved into the city to start in the world of oil broking, which is another really, you know, it's a pretty tough environment to be in, I was sort of a bit bulletproof from it all. You know, I just wasn't scared of failure. I wasn't scared to get things wrong. I wasn't scared of the other people in these trading pits, if you know what I mean. So I think it allowed me to just have a slightly different focus from everyone else. And then in that space, you learn really quickly. Once you can get your head around, you're going to fail, whatever it is you do. As soon as you step outside your comfort zone, you're going to get it wrong. You're going to cock it up. It's definitely going to go pear-shaped at some point. I think that's been the real big awakening and learning for me. And I'm still failing all the time. And I'm not deliberately failing. I've never tried to deliberately fail, but I get it wrong, you know, constantly, even in this world, in marketing and all these different things.
I say to people all of the time, a lot of my clients that I work with, is that a lot of people go, oh, I want to be fearless, right? And I don't think that it's so much about being fearless, right? Because we all have fears. You've just admitted yourself, you've achieved multiple successes across multiple different disciplines, and you still experience fear. But it's the person that doesn't allow fear to get in the way that is the most powerful. Because if you can walk into an environment, whatever that environment is, knowing that there's a potential that you might fail, but you're going to be okay because of that, and you're going to get stronger and grow, then that's a really powerful position to be in.
Yeah, I totally agree. You've absolutely nailed it. You know, it's not that we're not scared, because I am, and I'm still scared in a lot of the things that I'm doing, but it's that ability to go, do you know what, if it all goes pear-shaped, can I dust myself off and pick myself up? Is there learning in this experience? And there's a great author called Robert Greene, who you might be familiar with, who wrote, I think, 48 Laws of Mastery. He's the sort of the mentor of Ryan Holiday, who's another great author that I like. But he has a brilliant saying, it's all material. And what he means by that is, he's an author, a coach, a thought leader, brilliant speaker. Everything's material, whether it's a success or a failure. If you're in this space, you can actually pick it up and use it as learning for yourself, or something that you can share for others. And that's sort of been my approach ever since. And there's another great piece of research from a guy called Daniel Kahneman, who wrote another brilliant book called Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, who I really admire. He's like the grandfather of behavioral economics. But he wrote this research around the way we've got like a psychological immune system. And I sat down and spoke to my brother about this before. He's a big trader in the city, but we talk about these type of things a lot. And he gave me a lot of courage to make some big decisions in my life based on this research, which basically suggests that when we try and future project about an outcome, if we future project an outcome from like the standing point, we're using our emotions in the present. So it's really hard to get an objective view of it, because it scares the shit out of us, because we're like, if that went wrong, as I feel in the present moment, that would be like disastrous world over. But the truth is, and the research plays it out, when you actually reach that point, you feel completely different, because your emotions have all changed. So it's like a psychological immune system. Not that it means you can go completely gung-ho, but basically what it's suggesting is you can sort of go for it, because even if it goes wrong, you're going to feel completely differently about the situation anyway.
Absolutely, absolutely. I have there's a few core beliefs that I have that I call global beliefs that sort of overarch everything else, and one of them is that life happens for you, not to you. You know, and I've had some sort of pretty challenging stuff that have happened, in particularly in business and a few other areas, but those it's having that overarching belief. And we all know when we look back in hindsight, and you've had them as well, your injury that happened, when you look back on it now, all right, yep, you had a good time, but now you look back and you probably go, gosh, one of the best things that ever happened to me, because what that then led to. But we don't have that with foresight. We can only have that with hindsight. But if you have that belief and you know that's happening, then you can have a lot more peace of mind with stuff. But look, I don't want to go into too much detail just about what you've done, because there's so much value that I want us to share with everyone that's listening here. But what I do want to touch on a bit about what you've done, just for a couple of minutes quickly, is you obviously went from football to working in the city, oil brokerages, did that. Then you started a company called 1 Year No Beer, but I'm very aware of the personal reason why you did that. So I'd love for you to just share, and we'll just spend sort of a couple of minutes talking about 1 Year No Beer and obviously what that's done. And then we can really get stuck into some great stuff for people.
Yeah, so the quick story is, I guess I reached mid-30s in that space, that broken space, and just had one of those very slow epiphanies over the course of about a year, and just sort of went, is this it? I'd sort of reached that conventional successful place in terms of material, monetary, I guess, success, and was a bit of a 5 out of 10. And in fact, in that reflective space, I realized I was freestone, overweight, incredibly unfit, incredibly unhealthy, relationships strained across the board. It was just like a 5 out of 10. I was like, that makes no sense. I've just spent 15 years grafting to get to this place, and this is where I'm meant to be, like breakdancing in the office and hearing choirs and angels singing, because I've made it. And it wasn't what it was cracked up to be at all. And in that space, it was like, right, I've got to do something about this. I'm not going to run off to a monastery, as I was sort of slightly tempted to do. It's like, no, I'm going to stay in the game, stay where I am, but do things differently. And part of that was to challenge all of, I guess, my long-held beliefs about, fitness and health and well-being. And in truth, I looked at many, many things, from positive psychology to mindfulness to yoga. The one thing I didn't challenge at all until the very end was alcohol, because it was just, that was part of who I was, right? I was a broker in the city. I was an entertainer. I took people out. That's, in my mind, I'd equated alcohol with success in many ways. And to challenge that was really, really scary. But it was the one thing that I felt, I think it's holding me back. I think that's the one thing that if I can get on top of that, it's going to unlock everything else. And long story short, it was absolutely transformational for me. And just to really quickly say that where I was in terms of my drinking, there was no addiction, there was no rock bottom. I was a middle lane drinker, someone that would drink averagely, someone that would drink heavily, someone that would drink not at all, someone that would drink moderately, which is basically everyone. Going to the city of London, that is 90% of the people in the city of London. That's where I was with it. But even removing it was the greatest gift that, ever given. I'd set up a new business at that stage, and all of a sudden I got my consistency back. This is so key. I wasn't like hitting myself over the head with a hangover once or twice a week, which meant I ate crap food. I couldn't be bothered to train, or I didn't show up in the office. I mean, think about it. We built our business on Fridays and lunchtimes because I knew the competition would be decimated on a Friday because it'd all been out large on a Thursday. Most of them were going out at lunches during the week. That was part of what we did. So I was like, let's be on our A game, lunchtimes and Fridays. Vroom, the business started to grow. I was showing up in the office every day in a massive way, banging the drum. My relationships got better than ever. That weight just fell off me. I didn't try to lose it. I lost 3 stone in the end. Body fat went from 35% down to below 10%. I ended up reversing heart disease. That's another story. But it was just the most transformational experience of my life. And I just wanted to share it. Things were changing in my mind. Everything was changing. I was sort of like, right, I've just found something that's really important. I need to share this with people. I didn't know how to share it. I bumped into another broker called Rui Fairbairns, who had that sort of rocket behind him to make things happen. And he was, great at sort of taking that idea and shaping it into the 1 Year No Beer business, which has now helped over 100,000 people transform their relationship with alcohol. It's like a big global, I guess, business in many ways, and a movement. And just to clarify, I'm no longer part of the business. I still own some of it. I still have shares in the business. I'll always be a part of the movement forever. But I've decided to come out of that to focus on various new projects and ideas.
For people right now, because when this episode comes out, it's January, right? And I think, like you, I stopped drinking on my 29th birthday, and I said I was going to do it for a year, and I ended up going much longer than a year, because it was a challenge at the time. And then I did have a couple of drinks, and I had a few drinks, and I went, do you know what? I don't need to do this. And I've gone over a year since then. So, and people say to me all the time, Will, are you going to drink again? And I've never said I'm not going to drink again. But now it's a choice rather than it being a challenge. And look, you've got over 100,000 people that have stopped drinking. For people that now have maybe gone, bah, it's my release, it's that. What's your, if it was if we said, I don't know, 3 tips for people that they know they haven't really got a full blown problem, they're not alcoholics, but they're experiencing some of the downside of drinking alcohol more than they would like to be. What would your tip be to those? I think it'd be important to just touch on that quickly.
Yeah, and that is a really good point. So the key thing is this: you have to gift yourself the opportunity to see what it's like to be alcohol free. The truth is, most of us start drinking in our teens. We never really stop for any extended period of time. So treat it as you absolutely nailed it. It's an experiment. That's all it is. It's just a productivity experiment. Are you going to be miles more productive when you're alcohol free? So I think it's a mindset thing as well. You can do the dry Jan mindset, which a lot of people have, which is right. I'm going to lock myself away. Jan's a rubbish month. We're in lockdown. I'm just going to reaffirm to myself how rubbish life is without alcohol so I can get to Feb and then get back on it. Right? That's the wrong approach. So the second thing is to come at it with the mindset of, right, this is an experiment. Let's see how I feel during this experiment. Am I fitter? Am I faster? Am I making more sales calls? Am I more productive? Am I more motivated? Are my relationships a bit better? Am I less grumpy? Have I started to shred some weight? Is my skin a bit better? If you start to connect with all of those things, it makes a massive difference, because now you've just gifted yourself this lovely opportunity to almost look at yourself in the mirror and say, right, I've tried both sides. Then you can make a judgment call. Whereas I think too many people never give themselves that opportunity. They assume that, oh, it's going to be boring, it's going to be dull, it's not going to make a difference. When even for someone that's drinking fractionally, and I'm talking once or twice a week, or once a week, it'll make a huge difference. And just think about this. If I'm right, and I sort of know I am on this regard, it affects your performance, and there's tons of research around that. Even if you're drinking twice a week and a bit, you're almost 100% of the time underperforming. That's what I started to think about. I was like, hold on. And I, was out 3 or 4 times a week at that stage. 100% of the time, I'm underperforming through this self-inflicted underperformance. What's going to happen when I take that away? Vump, productivity, sales, everything just go through the roof. So there's some of the more, I guess, philosophical tips. The top tips are this: just start. You'll always look at the calendar. Now's probably the best time ever in many ways to start, because the calendar's not full up like it used to be. But very often people look at the calendar and go, can't start. I've got the 40th, the wedding, the 30th, the blah, blah, blah. Start now. Why wait? Why wait to start this experiment? And once you start, I think you have to get really technical and you have to plan it out. This is not an easy challenge. We're immersed in alcohol. It's all the adverts and it's culturally everywhere. It takes a bit of effort. What I will say is the alcohol-free alternatives now are brilliant, especially the beers. The beers, I drink more AF beer than I ever did usual beer. More regularly. I don't drink the volume that I used to drink, like one a night, but I'll have one a night every night because I just really enjoy it. The taste is sensational. So it's become so much easier than it used to be. And if you really want to turn it into a challenge, which I recommend you do, you can go to OYNB Beer. We've got 28-day challenges, 90-day challenges, and 365-day challenges, and find a community of like-minded people and go for it. It's just an experiment. Like you said, right? It doesn't have to be a forever thing.
I think what you said there is bang on. Most people, two things that you said that are really prevalent that I can say as someone that's gone through it. The first is all or nothing thinking, which is like, right, I've either got to stop and because I've got a problem and there's this whole stigma around that, or I'm a drinker. Whereas just saying, look, I'm going to have an experiment. I think it's a wonderful way of putting it. Is like it's a 90-day experiment, and also what you've said about doing January and going, right, well, I'm going to have a month off, but that means that I'm not going to do anything fun, which is a presupposition that you can't have fun when you're not drinking, but you can. Like you said, non-alcohol beer, it's amazing. Even now, I would I feel differently. I don't know why. If I'm drinking a lemonade or if I'm drinking an alcohol-free beer, I've got lots of friends that are obviously still drinkers and go out and socialize with them, obviously pre-COVID. And I've done stag do's. I've done Marbella trips with the boys and Prague stag trips and stuff, and been able to do that sober. And yeah, don't get me wrong. At 2 o'clock in the morning, when everyone's slurring their words, it sounds like they're talking a different language. It's you maybe go to bed a bit earlier, but it's pretty cool getting up and having that. But I definitely encourage anyone to test it and do the challenge. And I'll put the One You Know Beer link in, so if you're curious, and it's a great place for you to have those resources to do that. So so obviously you've recently decided to go on your own journey, but one of the things that you did, I believe, whilst you were at One You Know Beer, is that you went off and went back to school, didn't you?
Yeah, which was a big thing for me, having left school at 16. As mentioned, there was always a bit of me that wanted to do the A-level and degree route and that sort of rugby track, as it were. And obviously that all changed. But you know what I realized in my sort of early 30s, when I started to get on this momentum, was that there's nothing stopping me going back to university potentially to study part-time. And I became really interested in positive psychology. And the only way I could get onto the positive psychology master, it was a master's, effectively. Didn't have it as a degree, so I had to go back and do a degree sort of specifically to get on to that master's course, which I loved. Again, when you start to get that momentum back and that clarity back in your life and time back in your life, I really enjoyed the whole open university philosophy. You can cherry pick. It's a point system. I did an open honors degree, it's called, so I could carry over some education that I had from before. Absolutely love it, which led me into the master's degree in positive psychology and coaching psychology, of which I'm potentially going to do a PhD later this year. So my hat is firmly in the ring for a PhD later this year, which I'm super excited about. So yeah, I found that sort of academic side really enjoyable. Again, as someone that left school at 16, and it puts me in a really strong position now. Like my own daughter, as mentioned, is a really good ballerina. She might have an opportunity to sort of go on and do that at 16. I'm like, go for it. Why wouldn't you go for it? Because you know what, you can always come back to your education. You know, I'm a living, breathing example of that. Just because you leave school at 16 doesn't mean you can't go back and learn.
I think it's a Les Brown quote, if I remember correctly, which is, it goes something along the lines, I'm paraphrasing here, don't let schooling get in the way of your education. It's something along those lines, because most of us have been conditioned to, when we see the word education, we think school. Whereas now I educate myself every single day.
Yeah,
You know, yesterday I went out for a walk in the morning and then I drove to work, and I listened to this particular book I'm listening to at the moment is on 2.5 times speed. So that half an hour walk and half an hour drive to the office was 2.5 hours of learning that I did before I'd even started my day. I'm just obsessed with learning, but I didn't read a book from the ages of 11 to 18, you know? So it was for me, but because now I know how it benefits me, how it benefits my business, how it benefits my clients, I've just become obsessed with it. And I think that for so many people, it's when you find that thing, whatever that thing is you're interested in, you immerse yourself, then learning can become fun, right? And enjoyable.
that is the absolute key. So the reason I love it and do it is because I love it. I love the subject. I want to learn more about the subject. I think if you're forcing yourself, you know, a round peg into the square hole sort of thing, and that's why at school, I think for lots of people struggle with it, because you're sort of pigeonholed. Whereas as an adult, you can choose what it is you learn. I mean, I just chose the academic route because I wanted that to get onto that course and that robustness of the course. But equally, you can learn anything and everything. You know, I think there's something really special about, if you can, aligning with the things that you're passionate about and then becoming potentially a master of those crafts by doing the work, whether that's study or listening to books or podcasts. You know, this is a really important part of living a vibrant, healthy life, I believe, is to constantly push yourself a little bit in terms of your learning, stretch your mind. And I said this recently to someone, I think it's really important on this self-development venture that we're all on. I'm sure many of your listeners are on with us too, is that you have to be quite courageous in this space. You know, I think it takes a lot of courage to develop yourself, because you have to be willing to have your beliefs changed. And that takes tons of courage. You might read a book that fundamentally changes your outlook on life. That is a courageous act. For most people, they just want to lock themselves into a narrow world, and they don't want to have their mind change or their belief change. They just want to lock it in. This is how I live. Whereas the self-development world is like, right, I'm just going to read this book and that book. I might wake up tomorrow a completely different person that I went to bed the night before. How exciting is that, by the way? But that takes a ton of courage, because people are fearful of change. And I think that's been one of the greatest gifts of this whole thing for me, that I'm constantly evolving as a person, which I love. I don't want to be the same person in 10 years I was today, or even a year. And I think if you can get into that mindset, it drives the motivation to learn, which is so incredibly important.
We couldn't agree anymore. I mean, as you know, I've literally got the network called the Evolve Network. It is about evolving. And one thing I will say that might be useful for people listening to this right now that are studying a subject that maybe they don't particularly want to is, if you don't like something, change it. If you can't change it, change the way you think about it. So if you're studying for something right now that you don't enjoy, then think about how that studying that topic will benefit you in the areas that you do enjoy, and what that will start to do is change your attitude towards it, which will be beneficial. So you've obviously studied, like you said, you did the positive psychology masters, and then you've written a couple of books. Obviously, your first book, which was the Alcohol Free Challenge, and then you've written Let's Do This, and I'm right in saying that Let's Do This is about how to use motivational psychology to fulfill habits, not just set habits and create habits, but actually create habits that stick effectively.
Yeah, and this, and it's really practical, because there's so much noise out there, there's so much information out there. I thought, right, actually, let's just try and write something that's got a bit of a scientific backbone, but it's the practical stuff, like the real world stuff, the stuff that actually is going to make a difference, not the sort of slightly out there that sounds brilliant on the page that actually no one uses. It's like, what am I using in the practical space of helping people in this instance transform their relationship with alcohol predominantly, although the book's not about that, it's just a motivational book, but what works and what doesn't work. So yeah, the whole concept really is to try and use things to build consistency, because this is the bit that I figured out. It's like, to reach any goal that you want to achieve, ultimately it's just consistency over time. The goal task bit is actually never that difficult if you really like reflect on it. The thing that you actually need to do on a daily basis, not like the end result I'm talking about, but the thing you need to do on a daily basis is never actually that difficult, right? And I think people confuse the two things. They get confused with the end result, going, I could never do that. But the truth is, you don't have to instantly do that thing. What you have to do is incrementally build the skill to get to that place. And by the time you got there, then you would be capable of doing it, because your skill level will be so much higher. So it's not the actual goal task that's difficult. It's the showing up. It's the showing up for the year or 2 years or 10 years that it takes to get yourself into a position to be able to do that thing that you almost think is impossible from a standing start. So the whole book really is geared to building consistency in your life towards your goals, because the simple truth is this, and we do a thing called 10x accountability, which I really like, which is basically me knocking on your door of a morning and of an evening, and I'm sure you've done similar things to this, metaphorically in many ways. But what you start to find out when you have that level of accountability, like a coach that's with you, like in the morning and in the evening, you get found out really quickly. Where previously you thought you were showing up and you were doing the things that you needed to do, it gets exposed so quickly that it's like, oh, well, actually, where I thought I was exercising every day is probably only about 2 days a week. Where I thought I was writing 250 words a day to create my book is a bit sporadic, is maybe 3 days a week. But we confabulate, and we gloss over and we go, oh, I'm working really hard. I'm training every day. We're not. So the truth is this: when you actually do train every day, or when you actually do write your 250 words a day, the results that you get are unbelievable. So that's sort of, wrapped up into the book, is to try and bring people in just to, again, dispel some of their own, BS. A lot of this, we have to get over ourselves. I was the biggest BSer in the world around this stuff, right? Confabulate in every single excuse. Once you can remove all that stuff, let's get down to it. What do I need to do? I need to show up every day and do this thing. All right, let's do it. How do I make that happen consistently enough? That's it.
Yeah,
that's it. And ultimately, that's in the book.
So you mentioned about getting a coach, but for people that aren't in the position to get a coach, or they're not maybe at that point just yet, what's your advice for them to ensure that they do those things and they do get out of their own way? Because we all have willpower that ebbs and flows. So what are some ways of ensuring that you do that?
Yeah, so a top tip is the journal. I love journaling. It's a really essential part of it's my own little accountability center. So if you haven't got that coach that is, banging on the door morning and night, you need a place to come to one, collate your thoughts and plan and prepare, and two, hold yourself accountable to the actions that you've just said that you're going to do. So we have a system built into it, which is in the book, which involves like a morning question, which is basically how can you improve based on the score from the night before. And the evening question is, did you do your best to show up and action your goal task today? Score yourself out of 10. What that does, it just gives you a really quick, because it has to be quick. If it's not quick, people won't do it. Again, trying to be practical in the real world. It just gives you this really insightful score, even though it literally takes a second to write score. You can come back to that the following morning when you're mapping out your goal plan, as it were, based on that score. And it just creates this nice accountability loop, which you need so you can keep refining the system. So the key with the journal is as well, once you've made your plans with that lovely rational part of your brain, do not have a conversation in your head the following day as to the merits of that plan. Because if you do, you'll lose. You know, that primitive part of your brain takes over all the time. I mean, how many times have you woken up and had that conversation about whether or not you should exercise, for example, right? What's the outcome? Like 99.9% of the time, it's like, actually, do you know what? I'll stay in bed. I did exercise yesterday. I did exercise the week before. Like, again, we just get, you know, overrun by that primitive part of our brain, which is all about survival and keeping you warm and safe. So the rational part of your brain, use it to plan it, then just show up and make sure you do what you said you were going to do. And if you didn't, tweak the system until you do. Move the time of it, move the length of time you need to make it as easy as possible to actually show up. And that's how you start to build this momentum and consistency. And once you're in that little space, it's so much easier to start to extend the time periods. For example, you might get to a place where you're just writing your book for 10 minutes. But if you can build that momentum and consistency, then you can write for 20 minutes, then you can write for 30 minutes. But trying to write for 40, like on day one, day two, means you'll bail out because you'll end up giving up. It'll be too much. You're much better off to bring it into 10, into 5, and then build it back out again.
Love that. One of the things that I also really liked, and I'm not sure if this is part of what you talk about, for people that aren't familiar with him, the guy Jerry Seinfeld, who's a really famous comedian, arguably one of the most famous comedians that exists. He used a process to ensure that he created material every day, wrote new material, and all he did was had a calendar that he would put an X in. And after he'd done a number of X's, he just didn't want to break the chain. So then the goal become, rather than write new material every day, don't break the chain. And I've got this thing here. It's called a muse. Again, people watching this on YouTube, you'll know I've got a muse, and I use it for meditation. Are you familiar with muse? Are you familiar with muse, Andy?
Yeah, I am. Yeah, it looks good.
Yeah, so I love music. I look a bit like a Martian when I'm wearing it, but
it's like 1980s sort of headband thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Like
but it measures your brainwaves when you're meditating. And I wanted to test doing 100 days straight. So I meditate most mornings, like 6 out of 7 days. But I wanted to meditate. What was the impact on doing 100 days? And I remember one day I got to like 78 days. But on the Muse app, it says, congratulations, you're on like a 2-day streak, 20-day streak. I remember getting on to 78 days. And one day, for whatever reason, I didn't meditate in the morning that day when I normally do. And I got into bed, closed my eyes at 10 o'clock, laid down. I went, I'm not meditating. I'm going to lose my streak. I can't lose the streak. I want to make sure I get to my 100 days. So I got out of bed, got my Muse and did it. So, there's great power in that of building that accountability for yourself if you've not got that coach, which is a cool idea. But I love the journaling idea of the question. Like you said, I keep it really, really simple. And the beauty of doing it day and night, I suppose, is that it's constantly in your mind, isn't it? You wake up in the morning, you're thinking about your score from the night before. In the day, you're thinking about your score from the morning. So you're keeping yourself sharp in that respect.
Yeah, and just to that point, day one of there's a 28-day masterclass in the book is all about streaking. And I talk about Jerry Seinfeld for that same reason. So yeah, but what we say is streak with a twist. And this is the twist that would have helped you out a little bit and maybe kept you in bed. But equally, there's psychology around both approaches. But what I found in the alcohol space, for example, this, we use this as a big tool to motivate people. But what was happening, people would get to that day 25 or whatever it is, or 40, and slip up, right? Because that's life, right? Life's not perfect. We get sideswiped, we get ambushed. They'd have a drink, but they were so demotivated by the thought of going back to day one that very often that was it then, right? It was like, what's the point? And then that, I give up. So in the book, I talk about streaking with a twist, and the twist being that you just mark it as a blip and you keep streaking. And then you look at your totals. So for example, in your instance, you have gone to sleep, you'd have missed it, right? You wouldn't have gone back to day one, you would have woke up the next day and kept streaking, and then got to day 100, you'd have been 100 days with one blip. That's still bloody amazing, right? Your experiment, it's still tick. There's one blip in 100 days. So what? Do you know what I mean? So yeah, we talk about streaking with a twist. I think it's a nice way to reframe it. It still carries that power of, I don't want to break the streak, but equally, if you get sideswiped, you just forget, or you have a drink or whatever, you can just keep going. You don't have to start at zero.
Yeah, and I love that, and I'm so glad that you shared the piece around the having the blips, and then like you're looking at it and go, well, I've only had one blip in 100 days, and that's the psychology element of looking at it in a perspective that's empowering still in that respect. So for people that want to create a habit and often find themselves failing, whether that's that internal dialogue, or they have external, maybe it's their environment. I mean, let's talk about environment. How important is environment to ensuring that you succeed with creating habits?
It's incredibly powerful. We're influenced, and this is the thing, we just got to get it into our heads that we're these perfectly imperfect human beings, right? We're not these wonderful rational machines that just makes decisions and we are influenced by so much, and our environment plays a massive part in that. This is a classic case, right? Just think about Christmas. I bet everyone over Christmas ate way more chocolate and way more pies and everything than you normally do. Why is that? Because it's bloody everywhere. Like where you look in your house, there is chocolate, and what happens? That's your environment has just changed to such a way that you're now surrounded by temptation. Guess what? You're eating tons more stuff than you would normally eat. Whereas equally, again, from an environmental point of view, if you remove all of that stuff and the only things in your house are uber healthy, and there's uber healthy snacks and treats, guess what? I guarantee it, already your dietary or your nutrition will change just on that one simple fact, because we like to believe that we can select and choose and pick it. It's so difficult to do. So do yourself a favor. I think environment is a really big factor in any type of behavioral change that you can make. So a lot of things that we'll talk about, even in the book as well, not only your environment, the people that you're surrounded by is really important. And I like that. And I that's why these spaces are so amazing. What you do with the Evolve Network podcast, surround yourself with the people that you aspire to be like, or that could help you on your whatever it is you're trying to do, whether it's to start a new business or write a book. So, go and listen to their podcast, read their books, immerse yourself. It's the Jim Rohn quote, isn't it, that you become the average of the 5 people that you spend most time with, which I love. But actually, on that quote, just quickly, when you look at the research from Nicholas Christakis about how our networks flow, they flow to 3 degrees of separation. This always blows my mind. For example, if someone in your network becomes obese, your immediate network, so someone you're 45% more likely to become obese yourself. But it doesn't stop there. If your friend's friend becomes obese, you're 25% more likely to become obese. If your friend's friend's friend, how mind-blowing is that, becomes obese, you're 10% more likely to become obese. So Jim Rohn's quote is not even quite accurate. You're the average of the 5 people that you spend most time with, and who they spend most time with, and who they spend most time with. So your environment is unbelievably powerful. So the way I flip that, it's like, right, why don't you become that beacon of positivity and change in your network? So you flow it outwards. You've almost got your positive force field coming out and flowing all your good stuff into your networks, which I think is a massive motivational tool as well. So when you're trying to optimize your body or your mind or your career, you're not just doing it for you, you're pushing that out into your networks, to the people that you love, which I think is incredibly important.
I couldn't agree more, and you are that beacon of light for so many people, and that's why I'm so grateful to have you as a guest on the show. So thank you again for coming on the show. Couple of questions to look at rounding up. What's the piece of advice that you find yourself giving your clients, and not just necessarily about motivational psychology, but your clients across the board that you work with, whether it's your traders in the city that you've been supporting and coaching, or or clients that you work with in 1 year no beer, or the clients that you're working with now in your current programs, what's the bit of advice that you find that's the most common that you say to them that has a significant impact for them?
I think what we touched on at the very start of this, it's about that failure thing. I think it's being willing to step outside your comfort zone and appreciating the fact that as soon as you do, things will go wrong, but that doesn't mean it's a sign to give up. Actually, that's where the best learning is. And I think when we reflect on our own lives, and you touched on that right at the start, most of our greatest learning, and I wish it wasn't the case, but it comes when things go wrong. Think about your successes. What learning do you get when you hold that trophy aloft or whatever it was for you? Actually, there's not much learning in that bit. All the learning came prior to that place. So no, it's really about trying to get people comfortable with the fact that you're going to step outside your comfort zone. Things will go wrong. It's not the end of the world. You can learn from it and come back stronger. Love
that. And a question that I like to ask all of our guests, if you could go back and speak to young footballer Andy, what would be the one piece of advice that you would give him?
Mine's easy. I'd say cut that stupid hair. The worst long ginger-haired footballer. These images float around the internet and they haunt me. I'd go back and go, get your barnet cut. What are you doing? It's easy. No, and if aside from telling me to get my hair cut, I think I would have said to me as well, get over yourself a bit quicker. And for me, because I needed to get to that growth mindset, that was the bit that because I was in this fixed mindset. So it would be sort of, you've just got to understand that there's learning potential and there's growth rather than being locked into that fixed mindset. Because that caused me a lot of, I'd say anger and grief in my early years because I was so rigid in my mindset. Yeah. So it'd be get over yourself and broaden your thinking.
I think that's what a wonderful thing to finish on. So Andy, again, thank you so much for being a guest. If people have been listening to you and thinking, look, I love this guy, I want him to be the person that I'm sort of a few steps within, so I'm benefiting from the 45% of how he could be. What is how can people connect with you?
Perfect. If you go to andyramage.com and you can register for the newsletter, you get all the updates and whatnot. And on the socials, it's at Andy Ramage official, Instagram, Facebook. I'm live basically every day on there, giving it some. Well,
I'll put those links in the show notes. So if you're interested, then by all means, please do connect with Andy, top guy. Well, Andy, I'd love to have you back again in the not too distant future. We'll definitely be catching up as well. So thank you so much.
We'll do it in person next time.
We will definitely. Yeah. When the world allows us to, we can do that for sure. So Andy, again, thank you very much. For those
of you who've been listening, thank you.
Thank you. And if you like this, you enjoyed it, again, connect with Andy. Please leave us a review, subscribe to the podcast, and then you can make sure that you can hear it from our other fantastic guests. Until next time, make it happen.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Make It Happen with Will Polston podcast. Make sure you join Will's free Facebook group, the Make It Happen community. Please support the show by subscribing on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, or Google Play. Share this episode with at least one friend you think would benefit from it, and give Will a 5-star review wherever you download your podcasts. Until next time, make it happen.